from today. Thank you for joining our live stream here today. We are here every Tuesday, same time, same place, to talk about digital transformation. This is a live stream we host every Tuesday to talk about digital transformation, including digital strategy, change management, project management, process improvement, data migration, all that stuff, all the stuff that relates to digital transformation. We try to cover different topics related to that every Tuesday. This interview and this live stream becomes part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast. So we do this live discussion as part of the production of that podcast, and then we edit it and make it part of the episode that comes out next week. So by being here on the live stream, you're part of that live recording of the podcast. So thank you for being here today. I'm going to introduce our guest in just a moment, but our topic here today is the death of ERP software as we know it. An intentionally controversial topic that we wanted to get some engagement in discussion going on. Before I introduce our guest too, I also encourage you to drop any questions you have along the way in the chat. We're going to get to audience questions as we go here. We're streaming live to LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. So whatever stream you're watching and listening on, you can drop your questions in the chat. We'll see them here and we'll get to those questions as we go through the conversation here today. And then last thing, if you wouldn't mind, in the chat, just dropping in the chat what city and country you're joining from today. We have a global digital transformation community that typically joins these live streams. So we'd love to hear where you're joining from today. So if you don't mind, just drop in the chat what city and country you're in, just so we can see, where everyone's from, and use that same chat function to ask questions along the way too, if you don't mind. So again, topic here today is the death of ERP software as we know it. Really want to dive into some of the alternatives and some of the different ways that you can be thinking about digital transformation outside the traditional historic way of deploying single ERP systems. And we really want to have a balanced discussion here of the pros and cons of ERP software versus other alternatives in the marketplace, and really just talk about where the market is headed and how to really define what path might be the best for you. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. And if you don't know, Third Stage is an independent and technology agnostic software consulting company, a digital transformation consulting company. So we do not sell software. I think that's an important preface to today's discussion is we don't sell software. We don't have a dog in the fight. We don't care what software organizations do or don't buy, as long as it fits their needs and is aligned with their overall strategy. So that's an important caveat or disclaimer as we go into the conversation today. And joining me for the conversation is Greg Benton, who's the Chief Strategy Officer here at Third Stage Consulting. So Greg, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Good afternoon. Good morning. Everybody that's tuning into the live stream today, I think we're going to have a great discussion. Looking forward to it.
Yes, this is a very interesting topic, and one that you and I have discussed at great depth and great detail over the years. And it's one of those topics that seems to generate a lot of discussion. I imagine there'll be some on the live stream here today that agree that ERP software is dying and ERP software as we know it is dying. There's others that may think that is absolute garbage and ERP software is the answer to everything. So we're here to really look at unpacking the pros and cons of both ERP software as well as other options within the marketplace, other technological options in the marketplace. But before I jump into some of these questions and discussion points, maybe just tell us a little bit about your background, Greg.
Sure, Eric. I've been about 25 years working with different systems and different technologies, both in implementation of digital transformations and ERP software, as well as in some cases remediation of implementations that haven't gone so well. In all of that time, definitely been looking at the business needs of the client, of the organization that we're working with, in terms of what needs to be done for enterprise operations. And enterprise operations is really taking over for what has traditionally been enterprise resource planning software. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is how those systems interoperate and what's coming next, really.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting conversation for sure. And I want to dive into the whole idea and understanding of ERP software in general. If we kind of look at the history of ERP, which if you aren't familiar, that's enterprise resource planning systems that tie together a company's operations into a single unified platform. That's sort of the really high level summary of what an ERP system is. And ERP systems were created decades ago as a way to really give organizations a way out of the problem that they were having at the time of having siloed data sets and siloed systems and a spaghetti bowl of different technologies that they were trying to deploy and use to run their businesses. ERP systems came along decades ago to provide sort of a one-stop shop, if you will, or one solution that could tie together your entire organization. So it makes total sense where the origins came from and why ERP systems are around and the need that they fill. What do you see as some of the advantages of that model of having a single ERP system to run your business? And then we'll come back to what some of the downsides and alternatives are to ERP systems. But what are some of the strengths and why organizations do it?
All the way along, and you just outlined it perfectly. So over the last 2 decades, ERP systems have really evolved into greater and greater capabilities for back office functions within organizations. And in that time, they've really just kind of grown into siloed operational work streams within the organization that really aren't connected, that really don't come together in a cohesive fashion. And so enterprise systems and the software vendors themselves started taking on more and more of this functionality and putting it into a more integrated technology platform. And that integration, that passing of data between work streams and being able to make knowledgeable decisions based upon all of the data coming into a common source of the truth is the big advantage with enterprise software as we have it today. The other advantage is that, especially with the advent of multi-tenant cloud technologies, there is continual upgrades to the software systems that are leading edge out there. So cloud native applications can be updated, upgraded, and it does away with the old biannual upgrades of the entire software system that used to occur. So unified data, as well as bringing all of your applications and functional elements into one common repository so it can be managed under a single umbrella.
Right. Yeah. So it solves a definitive problem that existed prior to ERP software in terms of providing that unified system and the constant upgrades in the multi-tenant model that you described. Sounds good, right? It sounds like that's what we all want. We want an integrated system. We want a single platform. Sounds great. So why in the world would we be here to talk about some of the downside risks of ERP software? Because it sounds almost too good to be true. So what are some of those downside risks of ERP systems, and why would a company find any sort of problem or flaw with that model? Whether we're talking about SAP or Oracle or Microsoft or any of the big ERP software providers, what are some of the downside risks of those types of solutions?
Well, what a great segue, because it does sound too good to be true. And in fact, it is too good to be true. The problem with that model is that there are certain functions within an organization that really just aren't done well by a blanket or uniform ERP system. And so the next piece of this is really to go to a best of breed solution. And no enterprise or organization actually has, complete uniform enterprise systems as legacy systems. They've got a whole lot of manufacturing execution systems, supply chain systems. In healthcare, it's clinical systems that are unrelated to the core ERP, but have to function in order to make that business operate in a meaningful and valuable way, right? And so the best of breed approach started taking over for uniform ERP because people had to find better ways of managing their business and being able to manage the cost centers within their business as well.
Right.
And so that is why that uniform ERP that seems to be the panacea is really not the end game for most enterprise organizations out there.
Yeah, even the ones that are leaning heavily into the idea of a single unified ERP system, and they strongly want a single unified ERP system. More often than not, they find that just isn't going to get them all the way there. They're going to need some sort of bolt-ons or ways to fill in some of the gaps of what that ERP system cannot do. So,
That's right.
It's interesting that, I always look at the ERP software industry and the tech space in general, the enterprise tech space in general, sort of a pendulum that swings back and forth. And you had, I'd say in the early 2000s or up until the early 2000s, it seemed like the ERP software model was really gaining a lot of traction and a lot of momentum for reasons we've discussed here. But then what happened in the early 2000s is you mentioned best of breed. And just for those that may not understand that term, best of breed would be, instead of one system that does everything within an organization, instead of doing that, you would go out by different functions and find different technologies that can handle that function really well. So you might go buy, a financial and core accounting system, but then you might go find another system that handles warehouse management, another one that handles CRM, HR, whatever. So that's the best of breed model. But what ended up happening in the early 2000s was you had two upstart companies at the time that were not very well known, which were Salesforce and Workday. They came along and sort of disrupted that ERP model. And Salesforce, for example, came along with a really good CRM solution that could do CRM better than a lot of ERP systems could. Same with Workday. Workday came along and provided an HR solution that did HCM, human capital management and HR tech better than most ERP systems. So they kind of came in and attacked the vulnerabilities of that single ERP model and really started to chip away at some of the market share there. Do you see that trend continuing, or do you see, beyond Workday, beyond Salesforce, do you see other upstart competitors or other alternatives that will sort of chip away at the ERP model?
I do, absolutely. The interoperability of these systems, and you just described a scenario that is true in most cases. Workday has a great HCM solution. The finance and supply chain functions, especially in healthcare, very often handled by Infor, Oracle, some of the traditional ERP systems, and you commonly find that pairing, Workday and Infor or Oracle, in many organizations. UKG does a great job with workforce management, so you commonly find the applications under Kronos or UKG, along with two enterprise systems. So you've got, in some cases, 3 or 4 ERP systems, enterprise systems, bolt-ons, edge solutions that are all working together. That used to be a real problem, and that used to be an integration challenge that was met by, basically sitting and coding with an internal IT organization, the hardwiring between those applications and getting them to speak to one another. There are new technologies out there, Palantir, Snowflake, Databricks, that actually allow for an interoperation of those disparate applications and systems. And that really is changing the way that people bridge to a new ERP system, a new data and digital transformation. It also allows you to bring all of that information into a single repository of data, a data lake, a data warehouse, and then mine that for actionable insights into the business overall. So, and depending on the industry and depending on the number of edge solutions or disparate ERP systems within an organization, bringing it together with that interoperability hub, or as we call it, mission control at the center, is a new way of bringing together that best of breed solution.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. So it seems like back to the pendulum analogy, it seems like, the pendulum had kind of swung towards single ERP systems maybe 20 years ago. And don't get me wrong, I think there's always going to be organizations, of course, that are going to want and will use single ERP systems. But now it seems like the pendulum swinging a little bit back toward the middle, maybe towards more of either a hybrid or a best of breed approach, or something that is maybe lower risk too. I think that's an important thing to talk about is the risk profile of these different types of deployments. But real quickly, before I ask you a follow-up question on that, I wanted to ask the audience real quick, if you could just comment in the chat on, if you were to decide right now, what's the best answer? And I know this is a totally binary, unrealistic question, because usually it's somewhere in the middle, but I want to just get sort of a knee-jerk reaction from the audience here of, what do you think? Single ERP systems, is that the future, or is it more the best of breed interoperability sort of model that Greg's talking about here? What do you think the trend is going to be going forward in the future? I'd love to hear just what the audience's thoughts are on that. But while they're commenting on that, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Greg, on sort of the risk profile of these different types of deployments, because it seems like a lot of organizations, especially now with some of the forced migrations off of on-premise solutions and into cloud solutions, there's a lot of risk aversion, it seems like, in the marketplace right now, to where organizations aren't necessarily excited or willing to invest tons of money and time into a high-risk endeavor like ripping out and replacing their entire back-end ERP system because a software vendor told them they had to. So it's creating a, sort of a risk aversion, it seems, in our client base and in the market in general. How do you assess risk of these two different scenarios? In terms of cost benefit, or just overall operational risk, or financial risk. When you look at single ERP versus interoperability and best of breed, how do you compare the risk profile of those two?
Well, it's actually pretty easy to make a comparison between the two. You've got to look at your total cost of ownership for the organization, and one of your favorite words, it depends, right, is the way that we look at assessing this. But if you're looking at a uniform solution from a single ERP vendor, and you're going to be putting that in place over a period of 2 and sometimes 3 years, the risk to the business is that you're going to be undergoing this major project. And traditionally, that's been pulling people out of their day jobs, putting them onto a project team, and undergoing this immense implementation of new technology, of new software, and then not doing a very good job of managing the change that's going on in the organization. So just think about the idea of moving into a system that will give you early advantage and value. So if you can connect those disparate systems and look at the enterprise in a holistic manner going forward, put together your journey up front, invest in a phase 0 at the very beginning or outset of a digital transformation, and find out where you can get some immediate value out of the system by connecting those disparate applications, systems, and data sources, right? And bring it into a data repository that will allow you to operate your existing business while you're implementing this new enterprise software. That is a much easier path to quantify in terms of value and return on investment than just going into a wholesale kind of lift and shift into a new enterprise solution. So I think getting back to it depends. You really need to look at what your ongoing operations are going to require and how many systems you are looking to replace with the new enterprise or digital transformation approach.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of organizations too would be well served to really just sort of take a step back and not get too caught up in the term legacy or technology debt, technical debt. That's a term that industry analysts and software vendors will use almost as though you've got a bunch of technical debt, therefore you need to upgrade your systems now. That's sort of the sales messaging that you hear from the industry a lot. And that could be true. It could be relevant for some organizations, but I think too often organizations don't look at what they've got. Sometimes if you've got a 10-year-old ERP system, it may not be the latest and greatest, but it may be working just fine. And it may not be worth the risk of ripping out that entire system, spending a ton of money on it that may or may not deliver business value, and going forward in that way. So I think organizations really just need to take a step back and really look at who they are and where they're headed and what their needs are, and really use that as the guiding North Star versus what the vendor sales messaging are, which oftentimes are in conflict with what your needs are. Here's an interesting comment from the audience here. This is from John Meadows on LinkedIn. He says, what is the key, or what is key is that data accessibility is key for planning and reporting and ensuring that there's a control around reducing the silos of data that could exist. It is this fragmenting of information that leads to these issues. So I thought that was a really interesting point. And then John also had another follow-on, or another comment that I thought was really good, which is, I think for some businesses, it's key to have best-of-breed solutions, but smaller orgs will not be able to cope with the total cost of ownership of a federated network of best-of-breed platforms. So there's room for both. It depends, basically, is what he's saying.
So it gets back to it depends, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that seems to be that will probably be a recurring theme in this discussion here today, I would imagine.
But that's also pointing out why it's never a great idea to go with an enterprise solution that's made to be a blanket solution for every industry, every client.
Right.
You really have to look at industry solutions. Who else has done what we are planning on doing, and how well has it worked?
Right.
That's really a big part of that phase zero, of really understanding your organization, the readiness for change, and what have others done that are best practices, right? And what is the return that they expected, and what was the return that they received?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a key right there, is just looking at your business case and your
Yeah.
total cost of ownership estimates, your business benefits, the business value that you expect to get, and really taking a quantitative objective view. I think that's really a key part of it, and being realistic too in those assumptions around your business case is important. Another comment that came up here in the discussion from the audience, actually two people brought this up, these are great points and something that's definitely worth diving into. But Philippe on LinkedIn brings up the whole idea of platform thinking, as does, just to give credit where credit is due here, Brian on LinkedIn said the same thing, platforms and composable ERP. That's an interesting angle too, somewhat similar, but somewhat different to that interoperability model that you were talking about. And when I think of platforms, I think of like, Salesforce has the Force platform, where you've got third-party developers that are creating point solutions and specific tailored targeted solutions that do specific things. But it really creates this whole ecosystem of innovation and developers that are creating solutions on a common platform. Might be different systems, it might be different applications, but it's on the common platform. So there's some benefit of having that commonality there. What are your thoughts on this whole trend, or this whole thought around composable platforms and that sort of thing?
Oh, I think you pointed it out very well. Salesforce, ServiceNow, there are many different platforms out there that are allowing for real innovation on top of and beside ERP systems. So both legacy and new systems with low code, no code capabilities of really connecting them and managing specific functions within the organization that in the past really required customization of the software, right? So now you can configure the organization in a way that is kind of putting together Legos that you can manage a discrete supply chain solution that you need with an integration for an overall, for instance, SAP deployment with some of the low code, no code options that are out there. Salesforce can integrate with many different systems, just very easily through known APIs. And you can develop specific functionality around that platform that is going to allow you to really replace some of the tribal knowledge within organizations that used to, just because we know our business so well, we're able to get value out of efficiencies that we create within the organization. Innovation in product development, things like that, can now be handled or managed with a lot of the low code, no code type of platform development and integration.
Yeah, great point. We hadn't talked about the low code, no code piece of it, but that is a way that you can simplify the deployment of any sort of software, whether you're talking ERP or more of a best of breed composable ERP sort of model. So it sounds like then there's alternatives, right? Instead of looking at, let's just say, SAP S/4HANA and Microsoft D365 and Oracle ERP Cloud and NetSuite, Workday, or not Workday so much, but other than Workday, the other ones I mentioned are sort of your traditional ERP solutions, although Workday is becoming more of an ERP solution as they add financial capabilities and other systems, which is another interesting trend. As you see sort of at the top of the market, you've got the big ERP providers like the ones I just mentioned, and then you've got sort of I'll call them the mid-tier ones like the Salesforce and the Workdays that became prominent through their targeted best of breed models. But now Salesforce and Workday, as two examples, are expanding their capabilities to really compete more head to head with the ERP model, which I find super fascinating. It's sort of like they're moving upstream. Big ERP vendors are trying to move downstream, and they're kind of colliding in the middle there, in the middle of the market. What do you think? What are your predictions on where that battle goes, or where that trend goes?
Well, I think that you pointed it out perfectly. The big ERP vendors used to be known as where the organizations where old ERP systems or old systems went to die. So kind of a boneyard of disparate applications that were brought together under a single technology umbrella. And they've seen that, rewriting those systems on a new technology foundation and expanding out into more and more of the edge solutions, as we used to call them, are what the big ERP systems are doing. The platforms at the bottom that you talked about, Salesforce, ServiceNow, even UKG is kind of in that same category. I think they are colliding, and it's referring more and more of organizations that we're speaking to that best of breed model, going back into let's let UKG do what they do best. They don't necessarily go into the financial applications or the supply chain side so much, but workforce management they handle extremely well. Same with the Workday piece of it. Even though they're expanding into finance and supply chain now as a full ERP solution, their core value seems to be in HCM. So I do see them colliding in the middle, and organizations are going to have to decide up front, which direction they're going to go. What is the lowest risk for my organization in terms of, the 2 and 3 year journey? And I want to make sure that I'm not going to be having an obsolete system by the time I get to the end of that 2 to 3 year journey in digital transformation. And so I'm going to lower my risk by working with, the best solution that's out there for me. And I think that's been kind of lost with many of the big ERP systems, really kind of pushing organizations into more and more software coming from a single source rather than this kind of best of breed approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just coming back to the audience here. First of all, I want to sort of maybe call out where some people are joining from today. We've got people from all over the world joining us here today. We've got Manoj from Delhi, India, Ryan from Denver, someone whose name I can't see from London, UK, Tim from Fairfield, Connecticut, Third Stage Consulting, a company you and I know really well, Greg, joining from Denver. Someone else from London, Pakistan, India, Washington, D.C., India, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, UK. A couple more from India, Jamaica, Germany, Chennai, India. So a lot of global attendance here today. So thank you, everyone, for joining from all over the world. Couple comments I'll get to here real quickly. This is from Python Writer on YouTube. I just discovered this YouTube channel a few minutes ago by an ERP Next review. Greetings from the Philippines. So thank you for joining today. I'm glad you found the YouTube channel to join us here today. But here's a question from Kyler, my podcast co-host here. Really good question around how do you ensure all these applications are staying true or aligned with core business objectives? So regardless of whether you go single ERP or interoperability, best of breed, platform focused approach, regardless of what path you're going down, how do you ensure that these applications are staying aligned with your business objectives? What are your thoughts?
I think Eric and Kyler, that comes back to that original plan, right? As an organization, from a leadership standpoint, you should definitely be putting together the objectives of the organization for the next, 1, 2, 3 years, and then making sure that the expenditures are going to be realistic in terms of your overall budget and your total cost of ownership. And there's no such thing as full replacement. There's not a rip and replace strategy that's going to work well for organizations. You have legacy systems that are going to need to be sunsetted. So the sequence with which you go into the entire digital transformation is really important. And that's where it gets back to that. Let's make sure that we have relevant applications and systems that are going to run our business today. And 3 and 5 years from now, we want to make sure that we're sequencing or sunsetting or consolidating the applications that are currently running, important functions within the organization. So that's how you maintain that relevance of the technology that is a part of your digital transformation, is making sure that everything is in a complete plan going forward. Many organizations, surprisingly, don't do that planning process up front. And that's where they get into trouble, is suddenly they run into a obsolescence or a decommission of a system and need to immediately replace something. And that's where you get into real trouble.
Yeah, and to your point, if you're operating without a plan, or you're operating in a reactive way because you have to do something now because you're going to lose support on your current system, or the old system, the legacy system is broken and isn't going to support your business for growth. If you wait till those breaking points, if you will, that makes it a lot more tempting to just jump in and start making decisions without having a clear and deliberate strategy. So the more you can get ahead of that, I totally agree. You want to have a deliberate plan and strategy that really weighs your options and looks at the different paths you have, makes a decision on going forward in a certain direction that is aligned with your business objectives. Back to Kyler's question or point. And most importantly, you want to also recognize that there are risks to whatever path you're going down. So even if you choose the one that's best for you, there's going to be a downside risk. So if you go with a single ERP system, for example, the risk is that system doesn't give you all the capability you need. There's the decision point of, I might have to add additional systems to bolt on to give me the full capability of what I need. So that's a risk. Or if I go best of breed, the risk there is now I end up with a hodgepodge of systems, and now I've got to work more on the technical integration and make sure we've got single source of truth with data, that sort of thing. So that's a risk. Not to say either one of those are terrible things that can't be overcome, but you just need to know that whatever path you go down or whatever decision you make, you're going to have a downside risk. None of these are silver bullet answers, and you've got to have a clear plan to help you get there. What are some examples? I know you're a big proponent, and we as a company are big proponents of the whole sort of phase 0 pre-implementation planning and that sort of thing. What are some of the real high-level things that an organization should be thinking about and preparing for before they go down whatever path it is they're going to go down?
Sure. The thing that we touched on earlier is really establishing the business case for where you need to go as an organization, right? So it's establishing what is the cost for staying with some of our legacy systems, what is the risk of staying with our legacy systems, and what do we have to gain from moving to a new ERP system, multiple platforms, the interoperability model. Should that be our strategy going forward, or should we be looking at a uniform ERP system and go down that traditional model path? Establishing that business plan up front is critically important, and a lot of organizations don't do it. And then getting into a phase 0 where before your systems integrator or your software vendors come into play, you really should be looking at data cleansing, making sure that you've got an analytics platform that's going to support everything going forward, that you're going to have all of your information coming into one repository for that information and operate as a single business rather than operating in silos or disparate technologies. The preparedness of the people for making all of the change that you're anticipating with that digital transformation, right? So organizational readiness, data integrity up front, doing the data cleansing and the data migration planning for moving to a new system, and then doing a thoughtful and very efficient software selection. So selection of those software elements, software vendors that are going to help you manage your business going forward. And then after that, pulling in the systems integrators and the team that's going to implement the systems that you've decided are going to be the best for your organization going forward. So it's following those, continual path moves that need to happen over a period of time before you get into the implementation itself.
Yeah. No, that's well said. And we've got videos out on my and on Third Stage's YouTube channel that sort of dive into that phase 0 implementation planning phase in more detail. Here's a comment that I'll ask the person if they don't mind to elaborate on, but this is from Michael Martin on LinkedIn. He says that I'm very much against best of breed and a huge proponent of single platform. The downside is much less. So thank you for that feedback. Would love to hear your thoughts on what some of those downsides are, or sort of what you see the tipping point being that makes you think that single platforms are materially better than best of breed. What about I know we have talked about interoperability, but so I won't ask you that question again. But I did want to ask you a question around these forced cloud migrations. I haven't seen in my career. And I'd be curious to see what you think here, Greg, but I don't recall seeing a time in my career where you had this sort of mass upgrade happening across the board, across different vendors to new cloud systems. So in other words, you have this giant tidal wave or a massive movement in the industry where most of the big ERP vendors, or a lot of the big ERP vendors, are essentially forcing customers off the legacy on-prem systems into the cloud. And without us necessarily debating whether cloud is right or wrong or the best answer or how it's better than on-prem, I think it's fair to say that's just where the industry is going, right or wrong. That's where it's going.
Sure.
So then the question becomes, how do you think these forced migrations or the forced sunsetting of these legacy products, how is that affecting customer trust? That's something you and I have talked quite a bit about over the years.
Well, I think that there is a little bit of a lack of trust in the major ERP vendors, because the move to the cloud is a mandate that's coming as a result of the advantages of being in the cloud, right? So interconnectivity, interoperability, consistency of the applications, and the continual upgrades are all benefits of especially the multi-tenant cloud environment. So everyone understands what the benefits might be. It's also a great benefit to the software vendors themselves, because they're able to maintain one system to many clients rather than single systems, single upgrades, maintaining multiple versions of the software. They've got all of their people now focused on managing and maintaining and upgrading a single version of the software. So it's much more efficient for them from a financial standpoint. But it has created a mistrust. There are people that are running, older applications of Infor, SAP. To your point, everyone is upgrading and moving to the multi-tenant cloud environment, and really rewritten technology foundations underneath these ERP systems. And the forced march is really something that is costing organizations a lot of money in terms of the implementation, in terms of the change management that goes on with new applications and new ways of running those applications and systems. that's creating a great mistrust in the marketplace. But you're right, it's a tidal wave of having to move. So over the next 3 to 5 years, 80% of the organizations that are out there that are running legacy systems from major software vendors are going to have to move to the new ERP system, to the new cloud solution. They are decommissioning the older applications and systems, and again, that trust in somebody that you've worked with for 20 years is really deteriorating.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's fascinating to me to watch, actually, because you and I we've worked for different organizations in the technology, enterprise technology space, and you see the ebbs and flows of the industry, but I just haven't seen a time where there's so much skepticism and distrust of software vendors. And I think a lot of it is because they're in many ways getting bullied. Customers are getting bullied by the software vendors into changing something that this isn't just a technology investment or a technology upgrade that software vendors are essentially forcing on their customers. They're forcing a high risk digital and business transformation that organization may or may not be ready for, may or may not need to go through if it wasn't for the software vendors. And so that's part of, quite frankly, why we as a company, being independent and technology agnostic, that's part of why we're growing so fast, I think, is because of this distrust that's being created in the marketplace by the software vendors and by the system integrators, even the industry analysts that are out there pushing that same one-sided message. People are seeing through it, and they're seeing through it pretty significantly. And I'll be curious to see how it shakes out longer term. But that's unfortunate, and it actually, on a personal level, it is super irritating and makes me angry that big, not to get too personal, but that big organizations are able to just force, big Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, small and mid-sized companies. These big tech companies are essentially forcing them into these high risk propositions that have an 80% failure rate. They're getting forced into that in a 3 to 5 year window that you just described. And, with that comes limited resources, a strain on resources to be able to do all this work all at once. So it's a really fascinating time and one that I've never seen in my career, for sure.
Just to pile on to that just a little bit. So originally it was passed off as a upgrade, right? For many of these organizations. And people have learned or found out that it's not an upgrade. In almost every single case, it's a new implementation of a new system. It requires a lot of change management. It requires, a whole new technology foundation that your people who were certified and really understand how the old ERP system worked now need to learn a whole new ERP system. So everyone is taking this opportunity to go out there and see what else is available. If I was working with a single software vendor for 20 years and it was running my business just fine, but maybe there's somebody else out there or some combination of other systems out there that can run my business better, that can bring me greater value as a stakeholder, as a shareholder in my organization. And that's why everyone is now considering, where am I going to go in this digital transformation? It's that digital transformation tidal wave that you talked about. So fascinating time. Yeah,
absolutely. So we're getting some comments from the audience here, particularly on LinkedIn.
I would imagine.
So this is so the person, Michael on LinkedIn, who made the comment that single ERP is, I'm going to paraphrase, but he said single ERP is hands down better than best of breed. And then I asked the question, well, why? Why do you think that? And so he came back with some comments here. One of which is, let me pull it up. It is the benefits of a single platform. You have reduced integrations, increased security, improved reporting, ease of implementation, enablement of digital transformation. And then in another comment from that same person, from Michael, he also says that ERPs are very mature and most of them satisfy a very large percentage of requirements. I'm going to challenge a couple of those things. First of all, I'd say ERP systems are becoming more mature. They've historically been mature, but the problem right now, to your point, Greg, is that you're doing these big rewrites of the software, right? This isn't just an upgrade, like you said. This is a recreation of cloud versions of what had historically been done on-prem. So you look at, for example, Look at SAP S4HANA. If you look at SAP S4HANA versus ECC 6, or even more so R3, the even older legacy product that were both on-prem originally, S4HANA is a totally different platform. Totally, the HANA platforms is totally different. Yes, there's some similarities and there's some familiarity that comes along with it. So if you're an SAP consultant or an SAP person with experience with on-prem SAP products, there's gonna be some efficiency and learning curve benefits of staying with SAP. But to your point, Greg, they are largely rewrites. And if you think about how long cloud's been around, cloud hasn't been around that long. I mean, in terms of when most of these big software vendors started to make the shift to the cloud, it's only been a decade or less for most of these organizations. Right. Whereas they had decades to develop the on-premise solution and put all that R&D into it. So you still have a lot of catch up that's happening, I would argue, in the space, and we see it in a lot of organizations that are in the midst of an implementation. Like, for example, we have a client that's on the tail end of a 7-year Oracle EBS implementation, and in the middle of that implementation, Oracle tried to sort of push them into the cloud ERP solution. And that client, who's a manufacturing client, looked at the capabilities of cloud ERP or Oracle ERP Cloud and determined that just didn't have the maturity, it didn't have the capabilities that EBS had. So rather than getting caught up in whether or not they should be on-prem or in the cloud, they looked at functionality. Can this software run our business? And they determined that the cloud version wasn't ready. And so they decided to keep deploying EBS, knowing that eventually they're probably going to have to upgrade anyway, but they want to wait and be on the tail end of that adoption so that it gives Oracle time to develop and further develop those capabilities. So I'd argue that yes, ERP systems are mature, but unless you're talking about, say, a NetSuite, for example, that was a legacy cloud solution developed 20 years ago, 25 years ago, other than, say, a NetSuite who was born in the cloud, most of these other systems are now trying to catch up to their cloud versions, to the on-premise versions.
Workday would be another example of a cloud native application.
Salesforce as well. So those guys, I'd say, yeah, you're right. Those cloud solutions are pretty mature. But look at SAP S4HANA, Oracle ERP Cloud. Yes, they're getting more mature. In a couple of years, this comment will probably be obsolete. But as of right now, they're still trying to develop a lot of that same capability that they once had on-prem. They're still trying to develop that same robustness and diversity of capability in the cloud. So I don't think we're quite there yet. So I think that's what's creating this opening of opportunities and alternatives, is the fact that those systems are not quite ready for prime time in many cases. What about here's a comment from Ghassan on YouTube. He says, "Don't underestimate the amount of effort required for data migration. It's key to the success of cutover." And I think that's probably true regardless of what path you go down, right? Would you agree with that, Greg?
It absolutely is. We have another client that has been implementing for a very long time, and they really didn't establish a data migration path in the very beginning. Didn't really put together the analytics strategy that was going to be maintained for the organization all the way through the implementation. So now we are getting to the end of the implementation and go live, and we have 4 different disparate reporting systems that are going to need to be used over a uniform ERP system. And it's primarily because the vendor has changed strategies with regard to the reporting and analytics, and there was never any upfront plan to get from all these disparate data sources coming into a single on-premise system in the past to now a new system, and we're going to have to develop a new strategy going forward for the analytics, business intelligence, enterprise planning going forward. So I think Ghassan is exactly right. You have to make that a major part of your upfront strategy. Again, that's going back to that strategy and phase 0 approach to, before you even embark on this in full, get all of your ducks in a row in terms of that piece of the equation.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Here's a comment. I've heard you say something very similar to this, Greg. So I think you might like this comment, and leave it to Sam Graham, who's a regular contributor to our podcast. Just when I think I'm the one that's being disrupted, then Sam comes along and out disrupts me by asking something very controversial and
It's hard to
interesting.
do.
Right. That's why I love having Sam on here. So Sam on LinkedIn says, if so many companies will be changing systems in the next couple of years, are there enough implementation consultants to go around, or will systems be implemented by inexperienced consultants? I love that question.
I love that comment. That is disruptive.
Yeah.
But Sam is pointing out a great point. With everyone needing to make this move, I refer to it as really kind of the burnover period. Everyone's looking at digital transformation because they have to, right? Gets back to that whole trust issue with the software vendors. But yeah, all of the implementation teams, all of the systems integrators, third stage for sure, are all involved in digital transformation, are all involved in implementing new systems, software solutions, digital transformation. So that is taking the best teams. That is taking the A team from many of the systems integrators and applying them to the people the people in the organizations that get first in line. So now what's going to happen in 2 years when somebody who has said, well, I'll just wait and I'll find out, I can change ERP systems, or I can, midstream, we'll be able to make the changes that are necessary to upgrade our systems, to implement new technology. What if there aren't teams available to do that implementation? What if there aren't people available that really understand the new systems and can support the legacy systems? I mean, there's a lot of talk about backfill. So when you pull a person out of their day job to work on the project team because you want your best subject matter experts to be working on the implementation of the new software and the new technology as you're going into an implementation, right? How do you backfill that individual with people that really know how to run the legacy system at the same time that you're having the A-team consultancy come in and do the implementation on the front end of the new system that's going into place? That's creating a real crowd migration to the new digital transformations in the next 2 to 3 years that you described earlier, Eric.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And then, follow-up comment here from Michael on LinkedIn, who's commenting on Sam's question and comment, is that systems are already being implemented by inexperienced consultants. So I tend to agree with that. And if that is true, which I think it is, and not across the board, of course, not 100% of implementation consultants are inexperienced, of course, but with this mass influx or this mass migration that you're seeing of companies that are upgrading or implementing new systems all within a short window, that's putting pressure on especially the big system integrators to hire more inexperienced people that can do this, or they end up offshoring a lot of it too. A lot of the development gets offshored as well. So I think that is a challenge. But having inexperienced consultants on projects has always been a challenge and a sort of a wart in the industry, I'd say. But I think that's something that's probably become even more prevalent now.
It has.
Yeah. Let's see here. There's a lot of really good comments here. In fact, so many I'm having trouble sorting through them all. Which usually I don't, but today
I will say too that while you're doing that, the program management piece is really important on top of the implementation. As we've been talking, you may have a number of different platforms, a number of different systems that you're implementing along the way. Managing that centrally and creating your own PMO or program management office, or having someone like Third Stage help you establish that is really key to making sure that you have the right people and the right experience doing the implementation work, doing the ongoing enterprise changes that need to happen within the organization. So change management, the technical architecture, the systems integration or implementation work as well, all under that PMO umbrella.
Right. Yeah, great point. Yeah, in viewing this as a program rather than just a technical project is really
Right.
important because the program pulls in the technology or technologies that need to be deployed, but the program also pulls in other work streams like change management, data migration, and process improvement, architecture, all that stuff. So I think that's a great point. Is making sure you've got a complete program in place is very important. That is something that we help our clients with. Yeah, you also mentioned change management. You mentioned this before too, and I forgot to ask you or follow up or make a follow up comment. When you talk about change management, that's also something I think is worth looking at when you're considering single ERP versus one of these other options we're talking about, whether it's interoperability,
Sure.
platform, best of breed, or whatever. On the single ERP system, I would argue that there's more of a change management challenge because now you're sort of forcing the entire organization onto one platform that may or may not be aligned with the way you want to operate or have operated in the future. And so that tends to create more strain from a change management perspective. Whereas a best of breed model, it's not that change management's easy, but it's easier because now with best of breed, you've gone out and you've found the solution that best fits your needs for that one area versus one single system that by definition can't be everything to everyone. And so you're going to make compromises and trade-offs in that single ERP model, which is going to create change management issues. So what are your thoughts on that? How does change management factor into, these different paths that we're talking about here?
I think that you hit it on the head again. A single ERP system, while if it's a replacement of something like an Infor or Lawson legacy system going to Cloud Suite, is you're going to have a little bit less change in terms of the new applications, but nevertheless, you're going to have a whole lot of training, a whole lot of change management that's going to have to happen with the new applications. And I think that, people tend to disregard that. So they think that it is something of an upgrade or, that the change is going to be fairly uniform, and it's not. And when it's not, and there's the surprise that it comes with discovery that, the change is not going to be well managed within the organization. Suddenly that's something that has to be done after go live, right? And continued optimization. Whereas with best of breed, we shouldn't even call it best of breed. We should call it appropriate sequencing of technology.
Right. I like it.
Because you can still operate some of your legacy systems while you're implementing new technology components in, point solutions that are going to work for the organization. So you may not necessarily change all of the processes and have to go through all of the change management at one time for the new system. You can go through that in stages and plan for that very appropriately up front.
Yeah, absolutely. It's well put. So even if you are going with that single ERP system model, you don't necessarily need to deploy it all at once. You can phase it. You can sort of break it up into bite-sized chunks and that sort of thing, for sure. Well, I guess just to wrap up, and there's so much here we haven't talked about. I feel like we definitely need a part two of this conversation, partly because there's so many questions that we didn't get to here today. But one sort of closing question I'll ask you, Greg, is, as we think about these different options, we've talked about some different paths you can take, whether it's single ERP systems or one of the other alternatives. What are some starting points that you would recommend to an organization and their project teams to really help define or assess these different paths and figure out which path is best for you? Because we're not here to promote one or the other, even though it's sort of a biased title to this discussion, which is the death of ERP software as we know it. At the end of the day, ERP software is not going anywhere. It's going to be around for a long time. It's going to be a great option for a lot of organizations, but these other alternatives are going to be great options for a lot of organizations. So how do you determine what path or which path is best for you? What are some early sort of simple takeaways we can leave the audience with to get started on that journey?
Absolutely, internally develop that program management office and lead that charge for building the business plan, building the business case for moving it forward, having the executive level of the organization agree that we are going to sponsor this because it makes complete sense. So understand what your objectives are, measure those objectives all the way through. enter into a phase zero where you really prepare the organization and understand the organization's preparedness for moving into this digital transformation. And again, getting back to measure and measure and measure all the way along. So establish governance up front as well. So it's all of that strategy in phase zero before you ever get to the decision about which system you're going to either maintain or go with as a new digital transformation. Do the upfront work. That's the main thing.
Yeah, very well said. And if anyone listening in here is interested in learning more about what some of that upfront work is, or you want to sort of brainstorm ideas on how to get started, certainly reach out to either Greg or I. We can talk. Be happy to chat with you about what those options might look like or how you might get started. Well, I want to thank you, Greg, for being here. This was a great discussion, and this could have easily been a 2 to 3 hour conversation for sure. But we'll spare everyone that today and maybe do a follow-up conversation on this later on. And I also want to thank the audience for the really good questions. In fact, I think we're going to have to dive into some of these in more detail in a follow-up here. So thank you for these really good questions and comments here. And if you're listening or watching and haven't gone to the comments or you're not looking at the comments, I highly encourage you to check it out, just what the audience is saying, because there's some really good dialogue and feedback here. We didn't have time to get to all of it. So thank you to the audience for being so engaged, even more so than usual in this conversation here today. So again, this live stream will become part of the Transformation Ground Control podcast episode that gets released a week from tomorrow. So Wednesday of next week, you can find that podcast episode on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, as well as all the audio podcast platforms too. So if you listen on Spotify or Amazon or Google or Apple or whatever, be sure to subscribe to Transformation Ground Control. You'll hear this interview as part of that next episode that comes out next week. And again, we do these live streams every Tuesday to cover different topics related to digital transformation. So I want to thank you all for being here. Hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining. And thank you again, Greg, for joining. And we'll see you all next time.
Thanks all. Great discussion.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.